Hello. I don't think you'd need to tell anyone in Scotland where this building is. One glimpse of the extraordinary clock tower would tell them that this is Musselburgh and the Musselburgh Tolbooth. But they might not know that this is actually three buildings in one, so we ought to call it something like the Tolbooth complex. The newest part of the building from the 1890s is the town hall. You can just see the top of its roof poking up at the back. Next, there is this 18th century building, which was built as a courthouse. And finally, at the front is the oldest part, which dates from the 16th century. And that was actually a rebuilding after the English destroyed it during their invasions in the 1540s. So that makes it one of the two oldest toll booths in Scotland. The other is the Canongate toll booth in Edinburgh. The clock tower was built for a clock that was presented to the town by the Dutch states in 1490. The works of that clock are still there, and experts have said that they are in very good condition and could probably be set going again. That would make it the oldest working clock in Scotland. And I'm sure that if this was an old small town in the Netherlands or France or Belgium or Germany, a building like this would house the museum of the town, and that clock would be a leading exhibit. So for over 500 years, this toll booth was the centre of civic life in Musselburgh, not just for administration and town finances, but for justice as well. Civil and criminal courts were held here, including a number of witch trials in the early 17th century. The building continued to be used by the town until the Brunton Hall was built in 1970, and after that it continued in use for many other community purposes. But this decreased over the years, mainly because the buildings didn't meet rising standards for safe access by wheelchair users, for example. A few years ago, Paul Lambie and Barry Turner persuaded the trustees of the Common Good Fund, which owns the building, to commission a firm of architects with special expertise in heritage building restoration to make a practical study of how the toll booth could be brought back into full use. They came up with several schemes. There was a very successful public consultation exercise, and I'll just take you briefly through the most popular scheme, which was strongly supported by the architect consultants and by the public. The essential part of the preferred plan is that the main entrance reopens this 18th century arcade. So the main entrance would face onto a small square and onto the Mercat Cross. And I think you can see that this has the potential to transform Musselburgh High Street. The toll booth would go from a dark hulk hovering in the background to being the focal point of the street. And I think we can all agree that there is no better way to get or to give a sense of what a place is than to tell and hear of the people who lived there over the years and how they lived there and what they did. Now let's take a look inside the regenerated building. This is the proposed layout of the ground floor, and you can see how the new entrance gives straightforward access to the whole building. Also, that there are full facilities for catering, space for at least a restaurant and a cafe on this level. The architects were not asked to plan for particular users. The colour coding is only intended to show how the space could be efficiently shared between three separate organisations. This is the first floor with the courtroom restored to its original geometry, and you can begin to see the large space available in the town hall. The secret of the way the whole building has been made accessible is the creation of a service tower, including a lift, just here. And here's the top floor with the upper part of the large hall, and here is the top level of the toll booth itself, with the cells at the front of the building. Finally, here's a cutaway view from the back, just to show how much space is available. This is a relatively recent part of the complex, so there'd be no requirement to preserve it as a hall. You could certainly put in a mezzanine floor and create two large galleries. I should say that on completion of the architect's report, there was a very well attended public consultation, which gave strong support for the idea of bringing the toll booth back into use and for its use for broadly heritage purposes. Now, of course, the rearrangement of the interior space, provision of the lift and so on, would be a big and expensive project. But there are several bodies in Scotland which are able to make grants for exactly this purpose of bringing important historical buildings back into use. I'm thinking of Historic Environment Scotland, the Heritage Lottery Fund and others. So it's not unrealistic to think that these costs could be borne by grants from those bodies rather than by East Lothian Council. But what would be absolutely necessary for that to happen is that the restored building was both socially and financially viable, that it served important community purposes, and that its ongoing running costs continued to be met. The architects proposed that the building should be effectively shared by 3 users, and as I told you, their plans include catering facilities for both a cafe and a restaurant on the ground floor. If these were run as a social enterprise, they could be expected to more than pay their way. A second appropriate user could be Musselburgh Library, and if the library were to move, that would free up its present site so that it could be redeveloped. Before the building was mothballed at the beginning of this year, the largest single use of the buildings was to support the creation of exhibitions by Musselburgh Museum. We hoped that we could use space in the restored Tolbooth in the same way again. We would also hope that the exhibition space, which now occupies a high street shopfront, should also move there. And we think that this would give us the opportunity we now need to tell Musselburgh's many interesting stories using the most modern 21st century audio-visual tools. If you're interested in this project to renovate the Musselburgh Tolbooth and would like to help to bring it back to life, please just leave your contact details on the form you'll find here or drop them into the museum in the Musselburgh High Street next door to the Tolbooth.